Hello, guys. Welcome to Psyched Minds. We are reading We the Living by Anne Rand. If you have not subscribed yet, do subscribe to the channel, like, and share. We are on part 2, chapter 11. Pavel Sirov sat at the desk in his office, correcting the typewritten copy of his next speech on railroads and the class struggle. His secretary stood by the desk, watching anxiously the pencil in his hand. The window of his office opened upon one of the terminal platforms. He raised his head just in time to notice a tall figure in a leather jacket disappearing down the platform. Sirov jerked forward, but the man was gone. Hey, did you see that man? He snapped at the secretary. No, comrade. Sirov, where? Never mind, it doesn't matter. I just thought it was someone I knew. Wonder what he's doing around here. An hour later, Pavel Sirov left his office and walking down the stairs on his way to the street, chewing sunflower seeds and spitting out their shells, saw the man in the leather jacket again. He had not been mistaken. It was Andrei Taganov. Pavel Sirov stopped and his brows moved closer together and he spit one more shell out of the corner of his mouth. Then he approached Andrei casually and said, Good evening, Comrade Taganov. Andrei answered, Good evening, Comrade Sirov. Thinking of taking a trip, Andrei? No. Hunting train speculators? No. Been shifted to the GPU transport section? No. Well, I'm glad to see you. A rare person to see, aren't you? So busy you have no time for old friends anymore. Have some sunflower seeds? No, thank you. Don't have the dirty habit? Don't dissipate at all, do you? No vices? But one, ah? Well, I'm glad to see you taking an interest in this old station, which is my home, so to speak. Been around for an hour or so, haven't you? Any more questions to ask? Who, me? I wasn't asking any questions. What would I be questioning you for? I was just being sociable, so to speak. One must be sociable once in a while if one doesn't want to be branded as an individualist, you know? Why don't you drop in to see me while you're in these parts? I may, said Andrei slowly. Goodbye, Comrade Sirov. Sirov stood, frowning, an unbroken sunflower seed between his teeth, and watched Andrei descending the stairs. The clerk wiped his nose with his thumb and forefinger, wiped the linseed oil off the bottleneck with his apron, and said, That all today, citizen? That's all, said Andrei Taganov. The clerk tore a piece of newspaper and wrapped the bottle, greasy stains spreading on the paper. Doing good business? Andrei asked. Rotten, the clerk answered, shrugging his shoulders in an old blue sweater. You're the first customer in 3 hours, I guess. Glad to hear a human voice. Nothing to do here but sit and scare mice off. That's too bad. Taking a loss then. Who, me? I don't own the joint. Then I guess you'll lose your job soon. The boss will be coming to do his own clerking. Who, my boss? The clerk made a hoarse, crackling sound that was laughter, opening a wide hole with two broken, blackened teeth. Not my boss, he won't. I would like to see the elegant citizen Kovalensky slinging herrings and linseed oil. Well, he won't be elegant along with such poor business. Maybe he won't, said the clerk, and maybe he will. Maybe, said Andrei Taganov. 50 kopecks, citizen. Here you are. Good night, citizen. Antonina Pavlovna had tickets for the new ballet at the Mariinsky Theatre. It was a Profunian show and Morozov had received the tickets at the Food Trust. But Morozov did not care for ballet and he had a school meeting to attend where he was to make a speech on the proletarian distribution of food products. So he gave the tickets to Antonina Pavlovna. She invited Leo and Kira to accompany her. Well, of course, it's supposed to be a revolutionary ballet, she explained. The first red ballet, and of course, you know my attitude on politics, but then one should be broad minded artistically, don't you think? Don't you think so? At least it's an interesting experiment. Kira refused the invitation. Leo left with Antonina Pavlovna. Antonina Pavlovna wore a jade green gown embroidered in gold, too tight across her stomach, and carried mother of pearl opera glasses on a long gold handle. Kira had made a date with Andre, but when she left the tramway and walked through the dark streets to the palace garden, she noticed her feet slowing down of their own will, her body tense, unyielding, fighting her as if she were walking forward against a strong wind. It was as if her body remembered that which she was trying to forget the night before, a night such as her first one in the grey and silver room she had shared with Leo for over 3 years. Her body felt pure and hollowed. Her feet were slowing down to retard her progress towards that which seemed a sacrilege because she did desire it and did not wish to desire it tonight. When she reached the top of the long dark stairs and Andre opened the door, she asked, Andre, will you do something for me? Before I kiss you. No, but right after. Will you take me to a motion picture tonight? He kissed her, his face showing nothing but the ever incredulous joy of seeing her again, then said, All right. They walked out together, arm in arm, fresh snow squeaking under their feet. The three largest film theaters on Nevsky displayed huge cotton signs with red letters. The hit of the season, new masterpiece of the Soviet cinema, Red Warriors, a gigantic epic of the struggles of red heroes in the Civil War, a saga of the proletariat, a titanic drama of the heroic unknown masses of workers and soldiers. One theater also bore the sign, Comrade Lenin said, of all the arts, the most important one for Russia is the cinema. The theater entrances blazed in streams of white light. The cashier watched the passerby wistfully and yawned. No one stopped to look at the display of stills. You don't want to see that, said Andre. No, said Kira. The fourth and smaller theater played a foreign picture. It was an old, unknown picture with no stars, no actor's name announced. Three faded stills were pasted in the show window, presenting a lady with too much makeup and a dress fashionable 10 years ago. We might as well see that, said Kira. The box office was closed. Sorry, citizens, said the usher. No seats left, all sold out for this show and the next one. The foyer's jammed with people waiting. Well, said Kira as they turned away with resignation, it may as well be the Red Warriors. The foyer of the huge white columned Parisiana was empty. The picture was on and no one was allowed to enter in the middle of a show, but the usher bowed eagerly and let them enter. The theatre was dark, cold, and seemed silent under the roar of the orchestra, with the echoing silence of a huge empty room. A few heads dotted the waste of greyish empty rows. On the screen, a mob of ragged grey uniforms ran through mud, waving bayonets. A mob of ragged grey uniforms sat around fires, cooking soup. A long train crawled slowly through endless minutes, open boxcars loaded with a mob of ragged grey uniforms. A month later, said the title, a mob of ragged grey uniforms ran through mud, waving bayonets. A sea of arms waved banners. A mob of ragged grey uniforms crawled down trench tops against a black sky. The Battle of Zavrashino, said the title. A mob in patent leather boots shot a mob in bast shoes lined against a wall. The Battle of Samsonovo, said the title. A mob of ragged grey uniforms ran through the mud, waving bayonets. 3 weeks later, said the title. A long train crawled into a sunset. The proletariat stamped its mighty boot down the treacherous throat of depraved aristocrats, said a title. A mob in patent leather boots danced in a gaudy brothel amid broken bottles and half-naked women who looked at the camera. But the spirit of our red warriors flamed with loyalty to the proletarian cause, said the title. A mob of ragged grey uniform ran through mud, waving bayonets. There was no plot, no hero. The aim of proletariat art, a poster in the foyer had explained, is the drama and color of mass life. In the intermission before the second show, Andre asked, Do you want to see the beginning of that? Yes, said Kira. It's still early. I know you don't like it. I know you don't either. It's funny, Andre. I had a chance to go to the new ballet at the Marinsky tonight and I didn't go because it was revolutionary. And here I am looking at this epic. You had a chance to go with whom? Oh, a friend of mine. Not Lev Kovalinsky. Andre, don't you think you are being presumptuous? Kira, of all your friends, he's the one. that you don't like. I know. Still, don't you think that you are mentioning it too often? Kira, you are not interested in politics, are you? No, why? You have never wanted to sacrifice your life senselessly, to have years torn out of it for no good reason, years of jail or exile, have you? What are you driving at? Keep away from Leo Kowalensky. Her mouth was open and her hand was lifted in the air, and she did not move for a long second. Then she asked, and no words had been ever so hard to utter. What do you mean, Andre? You don't want to be known as the friend of a man who is friendly with the wrong kind of people. What people? Several. Our own comrade Syro, for one. But what has Leo? He owns a certain private food store, doesn't he? Andre, are you being the GPU agent with me? And no, I'm not questioning you. I have nothing to learn from you. I'm just wondering how much you know about his affairs for your own protection. What? What affairs? That's all I can tell you. I shouldn't have told you even that much, but I want to be sure that you don't let your name be implicated by chance in any way. Implicated in what? Kira, I'm not a GPU agent. With you or to you. The lights went out and the orchestra struck up the International. On the screen, a mob of dusty boots marched down a dry, clotted earth, a huge, grey, twinkling, shivering rectangle of boots hung before them, boots without bodies, thick, cobbled soles, old leather gnarled, wrapped into creases by the muscles and the sweat inside. The boots were not slow and they were not in a hurry. They were not hoofs and they did not seem to be human feet. They rolled forward from heels to toes, like great ranks, waddling, crushing, sweeping all before them, clots of earth crumbling into dust, grey boots, dead, measured, endless, lifeless, inexorable. Kira whispered through the roar of the International. Andre, are you working on a new case for the GPU? He answered, No, on a case of my own. On the screen, shadows in grey uniforms sat around fires under a black sky. Calloused hands, calloused hands stirred iron kettles, a mouth grinned wide over crooked teeth. A man played a harmonica, rocking from side to side with a lewd grin. A man twirled in a Cossack dance, his feet flashing, his hand clapping in time. A man scratched his beard, a man scratched his neck, a man scratched his head. A man chewed a crust of bread crumbs rolling into the open collar of his tunic, into a black, hairy chest. They were celebrating a victory. Kira whispered, Andre, do you have something to report to the GPU? He answered, Yes. On the screen, a demonstration marched down a city street, celebrating a victory. Banners and faces swam slowly past the camera. They moved as wax figures pulled by invisible wires, young faces in dark kerchiefs, old faces in knitted shawls, faces in soldiers' caps, faces in leather hats, faces that looked alike, set and humorless, eyes flat as if painted on, lips soft and shapeless, marching without stirring, marching without muscles, with no will but that of the cobblestones pulled forward under their motionless feet, with no energy but that of the red banners as sails in the wind, no fuel but the stuffy warmth of millions of skins, millions of flaccid, doggy, doughy muscles, no breath but the smell of patched armpits of warm, weary, bowed necks, marching, marching, marching in an even, ceaseless movement, a movement that did not seem alive. Kira jerked her head with a shudder that ran down to her knees and gasped, Andre, let's go. He rose swiftly, obediently. When he motioned to a sleigh driver in the street outside, she said, No, let's walk. Walk with both feet. He took her arms, asking, What's the matter, Kira? Nothing. She walked, listening to the living sound of her heel crunching snow. I didn't like the picture. I'm sorry, dear. I don't blame you. I wish they wouldn't make those things for their own sake. Andre, you wanted to leave it all, to go abroad, didn't you? Yes. Then why are you starting something against someone to help the masters you no longer want to serve? I'm going to find out whether they are still worth serving. What difference would that make to you? A difference on which the rest of my life may depend? What do you mean? I'm giving myself a last chance. I have something to put before them. I know what they should do about it. I'm afraid I know also what they are going to do about it. I'm still a member of the party. In a very short while, I'll know whether I'll remain a member of the party. You're making a test, Andre, at the cost of several lives. At the cost of several lives that should be ended. Andre! He looked at her white face, astonished. Kira, what's the matter? You have never questioned me about my work. We have never discussed it. You know that my work deals with lives and death when necessary. It has never frightened you like this. It's something the two of us must keep silent about. Are you forbidding me to break that silence? Yes, and there's something I have to tell you. Please listen carefully and don't answer me, because you see, I don't want to know the answer. I want you to keep silent because I want to learn how much you know about the case I'm investigating. I'm afraid I know already that you are not quite ignorant about it. I'm expecting the highest integrity from the men I'm going to face. Don't make me face them with less than that on my part, she said, trying to be calm, her voice quivering, a voice with a life and a terror of its own which she could not control. Andre, I won't answer. Now listen and don't question me. Please don't question me. I have nothing to tell you but this. I'm begging you, you understand? Begging you with all there is in me. If I ever meant anything to you, this is the only time I want to claim it. I'm begging you while it is still in your hands to drop this case. Andre, for one reason only. For me. He turned to her and she looked into a face she had never seen before. The implacable face of Comrade Taganov of the GPU. A face that could have watched secret executions in dark, secret cellars. He asked slowly, Kira, what is that man to you? The tone of his voice made her realize that she could protect Leo best by remaining silent. She answered, shrugging, just a friend. We'll keep silent, Andre. It's late. Will you take me home? But when he left her at her parents' house, she waited only to hear his steps dying around the corner. Then she ran through the dark streets to the first taxi she could find and leaped in, ordering Marinsky Theatre as fast as you can go. In the dim, deserted lobby of the theatre, she heard the thunder of the orchestra behind closed doors, a tuneless, violent jumble of sound. Can't go in now, citizen, said a stern usher. She slipped a crumpled bill into his hand, whispering, I have to find someone, comrade. It's a matter of life and death. His mother is dying. She slipped noiselessly between blue velvet curtains into a dark, half-empty theatre. On the glittering stage, a chorus of fragile ballerinas in short, flamed red tulle skirts fluttered, waving thin, powdered arms with gilded chains of papier-mâché in a dance of the toilers. She found Leo and Antonina Pavlovna in comfortable armchairs in an empty row. They jumped up when they saw Kira slipping towards them down the long row of chairs, and someone behind them hissed, Sit down. Leo, Kira whispered. Come on, right away. Something has happened. What? Come on, I'll tell you. Let's get out of here. He followed her up the dark aisle. Antonina Pavlovna waddled hurriedly after them, her chin pointing forward. In a corner of the empty foyer, Kira whispered, It's the GPU, Leo. They're after your store. They know something. What? How did you find out? I just saw Andrei Taganov and he... You saw Andrei Taganov? Where? I thought you were going to visit your parents. Oh, I met him on the street and... What street? Leo, stop that nonsense. Don't you understand? We have no time to waste. What did he say? He didn't say much, just a few hints. He told me to keep away from you if I didn't want to be arrested. He said you had a private food store and he mentioned Pavel Syrov. He said he had a report to make to the GPU. I think he knows everything. So he told you to keep away from me. Leo, you refuse to... I refuse to be frightened by some jealous fool. Leo, you don't know him. He doesn't joke about GPU matters and he is not jealous of you. Why should he be? What department of the GPU is he in? Secret Service Department. Not the economic section then? No, but he is doing it on his own. Well, come on. We'll call Morozov and Pavel Syrov. Let Syrov call his friend of the economic section and find out what your Taganov is doing. Don't get hysterical. Nothing is to be afraid of. Syrov's friend will take care of it. Come on. Leo, Antonina Pavlovna panted. running after them as they hurry to a taxi outside. Leo, I had nothing to do with the store. If there's an investigation, remember, I had nothing to do with it. I only carried money to Syrov and I knew nothing about where it come from. Leo, remember. An hour later, a sleigh drove noiselessly up to the back entrance of the store that carried the sign Lev Kovalensky Food Products. Two men slipped silently down frozen, unlighted stairs to the basement where Leo and the clerk were waiting with a dim old lantern. The newcomers made no sound. Leo pointed silently to the sacks and boxes. The men carried them swiftly up the stairs to the sleigh. The sleigh was covered with a large fur blanket. In less than 10 minutes, the basement was empty. Well, Kira asked anxiously when Leo came home. Go to bed, said Leo, and don't dream of any GPU agents. What did you do? It's all done. We got rid of everything. It's on its way out of Red Leningrad this very minute. We had another load coming from Syrov tomorrow night, but we have cancelled that. We'll be running a pure little food store for a while, till Syrov checks up on things. Leo, you won't start any arguments again. I've told you once, I'm not going to leave town. That would be the most dangerous, the most suspicious thing to do. And we have nothing to worry about. Syrov's too strong at the GPO for any. Leo, you don't know Andrei Taganov. No, I don't, but you seem to know him too well. Leo, they can't bribe him. Maybe not, but they can make him shut up. If you're not afraid. Of course I'm not afraid. But his face was paler than usual and she noticed his hands, unbuttoning his coat, trembling. Leo, please, listen, she begged. Leo, please, Shut up, said Leo. That brings us to the end of chapter 11. Chapter 12. The executive of the economic section of the GPU called Andrei Taganov into his office. The office was in a part of the GPU headquarters building with no visitor ever approached and into which few employees were ever admitted. Those who were admitted spoke in low, respectful voices and never felt at ease. The executive sat at his desk. He wore a military tunic, tight breeches, high boots and a gun on his hip. He had close cropped hair and a clean-shaved face that betrayed no age. When he smiled, he showed short teeth and very wide brownish gums. His smile betrayed no mirth, no meaning. One knew it was a smile only because the muscles of his cheek creased and his gums showed. He said, Comrade Taganov, I understand you have been conducting some investigations in a case which comes under the jurisdiction of the economic section. Andrei said, I have. Who gave you the authority to do it? Andrei said, my party card. The executive smiled, showing his gums, and asked, what made you begin the investigation? A piece of incriminating evidence? Against a party member? Yes. Why didn't you turn it over to us? I wanted to have a complete case to report. Have you? Yes. You intend to report it to the chief of your department? Yes. The executive smiled and said, I suggest that you drop the entire matter. Andrei said, if this is an order, I'll remind you that you are not my chief. If it is advice, I do not need it. The executive looked at him silently, then said, strict discipline and a straightforward loyalty are commendable traits, Comrade Taganov. However, as Comrade Lenin said, a communist must be adaptable to reality. Have you considered the consequences of what you plan to expose? I have. Do you find it advisable to make public a scandal involving a party member at this time? That should have been the concern of the party member involved. Do you know my interest in that person? I do. Does the knowledge make any difference in your plans? None. Have you ever thought that I could be of service to you? No, I haven't. Don't you think that it is an idea worth considering? No, I don't. How long have you held your present position, Comrade Taganov? 2 years and 3 months. At the same salary? Yes. Don't you think a promotion desirable? No. You do not believe in a spirit of mutual help and cooperation with your party comrades, not above the spirit of the party. You are devoted to the party? Yes. Above all things? Yes. How many times have you faced a party purge committee? 3 times. Do you know that there is another purge coming? Yes. And you're going to make your report on that case you have investigated to your chief? Yes. When? 4 o'clock this afternoon? The executive looked at his wristwatch. Very well. In an hour and a half then. Is that all? That is all, Comrade Taganov. A few days later, Andrei's chief called him into his office. The chief was a tall, thin man with a pointed blonde beard and a gold pince nez on a high, thin nose. He wore the expensive blondish brown suit of a foreign tourist. He had the long, knotty hands of a skeleton and the appearance of an unsuccessful college professor. Sit down, said the chief, and rose and closed the door. Andrei sat down. Congratulations, Comrade Taganov, said the chief. Andrei inclined his head. You have done a valuable piece of work and rendered a great service to the party, Comrade Taganov. You could not have chosen a better time for it. You have put into our hands just the case we needed. With the present difficult economic situation and the dangerous trend of public sentiment, the government has to show the masses who is responsible for their suffering, and show it in a manner that will not be forgotten. The treacherous counter-revolutionary activities of speculators who deprive our toilers of their hard-earned food rations must be brought into the full light of proletarian justice. The workers must be reminded that their class enemies are plotting day and night to undermine the only workers' government in the world. Our toiling masses must be told that they have to bear their temporary hardships patiently and lend their full support to the government which is fighting for their interest against such heavy odds as the case you have discovered will display to the public. This, in substance, was the subject of my conversation with the editor of the Pravda this morning in regard to the campaign we are starting. We shall make an example of this case. Every newspaper, every club, every public pulpit will be mobilized for the task. The trial of citizen Kovalensky will be broadcasted into every hamlet of the USSR. Whose trial, comrade? The trial of citizen Kovalensky. Oh, yes, of course. By the way, that letter of Comrade Syrov which you attached to your report on the case, was that the only copy of it in existence? Yes, comrade. Who has read it besides yourself? No one. The chief folded his long, thin hands, the tip of his fingers meeting, and said slowly, Comrade Taganov, you will forget that you have ever read that letter. Andrei looked at him silently. This is an order from the committee which investigated your report. However, I shall take the time to explain, for I appreciate your efforts in the matter. Do you read the newspapers, Comrade Taganov? Yes, comrade. Do you know what is going on in our villages at the present time? Yes, comrade. Are you aware of the mood in our factories? Yes, comrade. Do you realize the precarious equilibrium of our public opinion? Yes, comrade. In that case, I do not have to explain to you why a party member's name must be kept from any connection with the case of counter-revolutionary speculation. Is that clear? Perfectly, comrade. You must be very careful to remember that you know nothing about Comrade Pavel Syrov. Am I understood? Thoroughly, comrade. Citizen Morozov will resign from his position with the Food Trust by reason of ill health. He will not be brought into the case, for it would throw an unfavorable light on our food trust and create a great deal of unnecessary comment. But the real culprit and dominant spirit of the conspiracy, citizen Kovalensky, will be arrested tonight. Does that meet with your approval, Comrade Taganov? My position does not allow me to approve, comrade, only to take orders. Very well said, Comrade Taganov. Of course, citizen Kovalensky is the sole legal registered owner of that food store, as we have checked. He is an aristocrat by birth and the son of a father executed for counter-revolution. He has been arrested before for an illegal attempt to leave the country. He is a living symbol of the class which our working masses know to be the bitterest enemy of the Soviets. Our working masses, justly angered by lengthy privation, by long hours of waiting in line at our cooperatives, by lack of the barest necessities, will know who is to blame for their hardships. They will know who strikes deadly blows at the very heart of our economic life. The last descendant of a greedy, exploiting aristocracy will pay the penalty due every member of his class. Yes, comrade. A public trial with headlines in the papers and a radio microphone in the courtroom? Precisely, Comrade Taganov. And what if citizen Kovalensky talks too much and too near the microphone? What if he mentions names? Oh, nothing to fear, Comrade Taganov. Those gentlemen are easy to handle. He'll be promised life to say only what he's told to say. He'll be expecting a pardon even when he hears his death sentence. One can make promises, you know. One doesn't always have to keep them. And when he faces the firing squad, there will be no microphone on hand. Precisely. And of course, it won't be necessary to mention that he was jobless and starving at the time he entered the employ of those unnamed persons. What's that, Comrade Taganov? A helpful suggestion, comrade. It will also be important to explain how a penniless aristocrat managed to lay his hand on the very heart of our economic life. Comrade Taganov, you have a remarkable gift for platform oratory. Oratory. Too remarkable a gift. It is not always an asset to an agent of the GPU. You should be careful lest it be appreciated and you find yourself sent to a nice post. In the Turkestan, for instance, where you will have full opportunity to display it, like Comrade Trotsky, for instance. I have served in the Red Army under Comrade Trotsky. I wouldn't remember that too often, Comrade Taganov, if I were you. I won't, comrade. I shall do my best to forget it. At 6 o'clock tonight, Comrade Taganov, you will report for duty to search Citizen Kovalensky's apartment for any additional evidence or documents pertaining to this case, and you will arrest Citizen Kovalensky. Yes, comrade. That's all, Comrade Taganov. Yes, comrade. The executive of the economic section of the GPU smiled, showing his gums at Comrade Pavel Syrov and said coldly, hereafter, Comrade Syrov, you will confine your literary efforts to matters pertaining to your job on the railroad. Oh, sure, pal, said Pavel Syrov. Don't worry. I'm not the one to worry in this case, I'll remind you. Oh, hell, I've worried till I'm seasick. What do you want? One has only so many hairs on to turn grey, but only one head under the hair. What do you mean? You have the letter, haven't you? Not anymore. Where is it? In the furnace. Thanks, pal. You have good reason to be grateful. Oh, sure, I am grateful. A good turn deserves another. An eye for an eye. How does the saying go? I keep my mouth shut about some things and you keep others shut for me about my little sins. Like good pals. It's not as simple as that, Syrov. For instance, your aristocratic playmate, Citizen Kovalensky, will have to go on trial and hell, do you think that will make me cry? I'll be only too glad to see that arrogant bum get his white neck twisted. Your health, Comrade Morozov, requires a long rest and a trip to a warmer climate, said the official. That is why, in acknowledgement of your resignation, we are giving you this assignment to a place in a house of rest. You understand? Yes, said Morozov, mopping his forehead. I understand. It is a pleasant sanatorium in the Crimea, restful and quiet, far from the noises of the cities. It will help your health a great deal. I would suggest that you take full advantage of the privilege for, let us say, 6 months. I would not advise you to hurry back, Comrade Morozov. No, said Morozov. I won't hurry. And there's another advice I would like to give you, Comrade Morozov. You're going to hear a great deal from the newspapers about the trial of a certain Citizen Kovalensky for counter-revolutionary speculations. It would be wise to let your fellow patients in the sanatorium understand that you know nothing about the case. Of course, comrade, I don't know a thing about it. Not a thing. The official bent towards Morozov and whispered bluntly, confidentially, and if I were you, I wouldn't try to pull any wires for Kovalensky, even though he's going to be going to the firing squad. Morozov looked up into the official's face and drawled, his soft vowels blurring, trailing off into a whine, his wide, vertical nostrils quivering. Who, me? Pull any wires? For him? Why should I, comrade? Why should I? I had nothing to do with him. He owned that store, he alone. You can look up the registration. He alone. He can't prove I knew anything about anything. He alone, sole owner. Lev Kovalensky, you can look it up. Lavrov's wife opened the door. She made a choked sound like a hiccup somewhere in her throat and clamped her hand over her mouth when she saw Andrei Taganov's leather jacket and the holster on his hip, and behind him the steel blades of 4 bayonets. 4 soldiers entered, following Andrei. The last one slammed the door shut imperiously. Lord merciful, oh my Lord merciful, wailed the woman, clasping a faded apron in both hands. Keep still, ordered Andrei. Where's Citizen Kovalensky's room? The woman pointed with a shaking finger and kept on pointing, foolishly. persistently while the soldiers followed Andre. She stared stupidly at the clothes rack in the lobby, at the old coats that seemed warm and creased to the lines of human bodies, hanging there while three thin steel blades moved slowly past and six boots stamped heavily, the floor sounding like a muffled drum. The soldiers with the fourth bayonet remained standing at the door. Lavrov jumped up when he saw them. Andrei crossed the room swiftly without looking at him. A short, sharp movement of Andrei's hand, brusque and imperious as a lash, made one of the soldiers remain stationed at the door. The others followed Andrei into Leo's room. Leo was alone. He sat in a deep armchair by the lighted fireplace in his shirt sleeves, reading a book. The book was the first thing to move when the door was flung open. It descended slowly to the arms of the chair and a steady hand closed it. Then Leo rose unhurriedly, the glow of the fire flickering on the white shirt on his straight shoulders. He said, smiling, his smile a scornful arc. Well, Comrade Taganov, didn't you know that someday we would meet like this? Andrei's face had no expression. It was set and motionless like a passport photograph, as if lines and muscles were hardened into something which had no human meaning, something which was a human face in shape only. He handed to Leo a paper bearing official stamps. He said in a voice which was a human voice only because it made sounds that were of human alphabet, "Search warrant, Citizen Kovalensky." "Go ahead," said Leo, bowing sternly, graciously, as if to a guest at a formal reception. "You are quite welcome." Two swift movements of Andrei's hands sent one soldier to a chest of drawers and the other to the bed. Drawers clattered open. White sacks of underwear fell to the floor from under huge dark fists that dug swiftly, expertly, and slammed the door shut with a bang. One after the other, a white pile grew on the floor, around black boots glistening with melting snow. A quick hand ripped the satin cover off the bed, the quilt and the sheets. The thrust of a bayonet split the mattress open, and two fists disappeared in the cut. Andrei opened the drawers of a desk. He went through them swiftly, mechanically, his thumb running the pages of the book in a quick fan-shaped whirl, with a swishing rustle like the shuffling of a pack of cards. He threw the book aside, gathering all notes and letters, shoving them into his briefcase. Leo stood alone in the middle of the room. The men took no notice of his presence, as if their actions did not concern him, as if he were only a piece of furniture, the last one to be torn open. He was half sitting, half leaning against a table, his two hands on the edge, his shoulders hunched, his long legs sliding forward. The locks creaked in the silence, and things thudded against the floor, and the papers rustled in Andrei's fingers. "I'm sorry I can't oblige you," said Leo, "by letting you find secret plans to blow up the Kremlin and overthrow the Soviets, Comrade Taganov." "Citizen Kovalensky," said Andrei as if they had never met before, "you are speaking to a representative of the GPU." "You didn't think I had forgotten that, did you?" said Leo. A soldier stuck a bayonet into a pillow and little white flakes of down fluttered up like snowdrops. Andrei jerked the door of a cabinet open. The dishes and glasses tinkled as he piled them swiftly, softly on the carpet. Leo opened his gold secret cigarette case and extended it to Andrei. "No, thank you," said Andrei. Leo lighted a cigarette. The match quivered in his hand for an instant, then grew steady. He sat on the edge of the table, swinging one leg, smoke rising slowly in a thin blue column. "The survival," said Leo, "of the fittest. However, not all philosophers are right. I've always wanted to ask them one question. The fittest for what? You should be able to answer it, Comrade Taganov. What are your philosophical convictions? We have never had a chance to discuss that, and this would be an appropriate time. I would suggest," said Andrei, "that you keep silent." "And when a representative of the GPU suggests," said Leo, "it's a command, isn't it? I realize that one should know how to respect the grandeur of authority under all circumstances, no matter how trying to the self-respect of those in power." One of the soldiers raised his head and made a step toward Leo. A glance from Andrei stopped him. The soldier opened a wardrobe and took Leo's suit out one by one, running his hand through the pockets and linings. Andrei opened another wardrobe. The wardrobe smelled of a fine French perfume. He saw a woman's dresses hanging in a row. What's the matter, Comrade Taganov? Asked Leo. Andrei was holding a red dress. It was a plain red dress with a patent leather belt, four buttons, a round collar, and a huge bow. Andrei held it spread out in his two hands and looked at it. The red cloth spurted in small puffs between his fingers, then his eyes moved slowly, a glance like a weight grating through space to the line of clothes in the wardrobe. He saw a black velvet dress he knew, a coat with a fur collar, a white blouse. He asked, "Whose are those?" "My mistresses." Leo answered, his eyes fixed on Andrei's face, pronouncing the word with a mocking contempt that suggested the infamy of obscenity. Andrei's face had no expression, no human meaning. He looked down at the dress, his lashes like two black crescents on the sunken cheeks. Then he straightened the dress slowly and cautiously, a little awkwardly as if it were a breakable glass, hung it back in the wardrobe. Leo chuckled, his eyes dark, his mouth twisted. "A disappointment, isn't it, Comrade Taganov?" Andrei did not answer. He took the dresses out slowly one by one and ran his fingers through the pockets, through the soft folds that smelled of a French perfume. "I say you can't, citizen." The guard's voice roared suddenly behind the door. "You can't go in now." There was the sound of a struggle behind the door as if an arm had pushed a body aside. A voice screamed, and it was not a woman's voice, it was not a female's voice, it was the ferocious howl of an animal in mortal agony. "Let me in there! Let me in!" Andrei looked at the door and walked to it slowly and threw it open. Andrei Taganov and Kira Argonova stood face to face. He asked slowly, evenly, the syllables falling like measured drops of water. "Citizen Argonova, do you live here?" She answered, her head high, her eyes holding his, the sound of her voice like his. "Yes." She stepped into the room, the soldier closed the door. Andrei Taganov turned very slowly, his right shoulder drooping, every tendon of his body pulled to the effort of the motion, very cautiously as if a knife had been thrust between his shoulder blades, and he had to move carefully not to disturb it. His left arm hung unnaturally, bent at the elbow, his fingers half closed as if holding something they could not spill. He turned to the soldiers and said, "Search that cabinet and the boxes in the corner." Then he walked back to the open wardrobe. His steps in the locks of the fireplace creaked in the silence. Kira leaned against the wall, her hat in her hand. The hat slipped out of her fingers and fell to the floor unnoticed. "I'm sorry, dearest," said Leo. "I hoped it would be over before you came back." She was not looking at Leo. She was looking at the tall figure in a leather jacket with a holster on his hip. Andre walked to her dresser and opened the drawers, and she saw her underwear in his hand. White batiste nightgowns, lace ruffles, crumpled in his steady, unhurried fingers. "Look through the Davenport pillows," Andre ordered the soldiers, "and lift that rug." Kira stood pressed against the wall, her knees sagging, her hips, arms, and shoulders blades holding her upright. "That will be all," Andre ordered the soldiers. He closed the last drawer evenly without sound. He took his briefcase from the table and turned to Leo. He said, his mouth opening strangely, his upper lip motionless, and only the lower lip moving to form the sounds. "Citizen Kovalinsky, you are under arrest." Leo shrugged and reached silently for his coat. His mouth was drooping contemptuously, but he noticed that his fingers were trembling. He threw his head up and flung his words at Andre. "I'm sure this is the most pleasant duty you have ever performed, Comrade Taganov." The soldiers picked up their bayonets, kicking aside the things on the cluttered floor. Leo walked to the mirror and adjusted his tie, his coat, his hair with the meticulous precision of a man dressing from an important social engagement. His fingers were not trembling any longer. He folded his handkerchief neatly and slipped it into his breast pocket. Andre stood waiting. Leo stopped before Kira on his way out. "Aren't you going to say goodbye, Kira?" he asked. He took her in his arm and kissed her. It was a long kiss. Andre stood waiting. "I have only one last favor to ask, Kira," Leo whispered. "I hope you will forget me." She did not answer. A soldier threw the door open. Andre walked out and Leo followed. The soldier closed the door behind them. That brings us to the end of chapter 12. We'll continue with chapter 13 in our next recording, and mostly the next recording will be our last 13, 14, and 15. We'll complete in the next recording, and that will bring us to the end of the book. Till then, you can also give out suggestions if there is any, and if you want me to read any books, any recommendations, and also you can write in the comment section the feedbacks, anything positive, negative, anything at all. If you have not subscribed to the channel, do subscribe, like, and share if you like. Oh, well, and the next recording will be tomorrow. I will be uploading it on the page. Bye bye for now. Take care. Keep reading. Bye.